If you could take a moment and go to thegrowingbanddirector.com to give at least $5 or $3 a month, and it helps the content continue to be created for you to help our profession grow. Let's go back to our scheduled episode. Excelsior Music Publishing is proud to sponsor the Growing Band Director podcast with composers who care about the educational needs of your students. Excelsior Music Publishing offers music for concert band and jazz ensemble, as well as method books and solo and ensemble works for all levels and occasions. This includes a wide selection of festive music for fall, holiday, and Christmas concerts. Find music for your next performance at excelsiormusic.com. That's EXCELCIA music.com. You need to know about Tuner Caddy. It was invented by Mark Casperson, a band director of 38 years who got tired of dealing with dropped tuners and distracted kids. So he created a solution that actually works in a busy rehearsal room. And get this, it took him 57 prototypes to get it just right. That tells you how committed he is to getting it right for directors and students alike. Since then, Tuner Caddy has been showing up in some of the most elite music programs in the country. We're talking about Mouse Middle School in Frisco, Texas, Cooper Junior High in Virginia, Arbor Creek and Creek Valley in Louisville, Rushing Middle School in Prosper, and many more. These are groups that are playing at the highest level, and they're trusting Tuner Caddy to help them stay in tune. Literally. You'll even find them on stage at the Midwest Clinic, TMEA, and the Music for All Clinic. Classic model fits onto any stand, and there's even a Student Pro, which is a slimmer one for wire stands, and now also a tuner metronome transposable and comes with a 6-foot mic. Check it out at tunercaddy.com or through Music and Arts, Sweetwater, Premier Music Teaching Aids, or your local retailer. If you're writing a grant, Mark and his team are ready to help you out. Check them out at tunercaddy.com. Teachers, do you spend valuable time all year correcting your students' hand position instead of focusing on the music? Thumb Gummy solves that. These simple, cost-effective teaching aids fit on trumpets and trombones to guide the right hand into proper playing position, reducing tension, improving form, and giving tactile feedback so students can focus on playing, not adjusting. It's easy to use, comfortable, and designed by teachers and players for beginners as well as older students. Join thousands already seeing the difference, and keep an eye out for our new clarinet thumb rest coming soon. Visit thumbgummy.com to learn more. That's thumbgummy.com. Welcome back to the Growing Band Director podcast. This is episode number 287. I'm here with Marc Whitlock. Marc, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for joining us. And I just will say that in the competition of shirts between my shirt and your shirt, you win hands down. I love it. We're going to be talking about some show design stuff today, especially when it comes to crafting emotional impacts for the marching band show, which honestly is an amazing topic. And we're going to get to that in a minute. Just a brief background of you as a band director and your involvement in drum corps as well for people who, like me, who don't know you very well.
So, yeah, thank you. I'll go chronologically. I'm just, and you know this. Our students look at us and say, oh, they're like 50 something or 40 something or 60 something, but we're still that band kid that started way back in 6th grade, deep in our core. So like everybody, I started with that. And then I had the bug early on in 7th grade. And then in 9th grade, I had an opportunity to start drum corps. And it was wonderful. It was a small little corps in Northern Kentucky called the Golden Knights. And they later became Pride of Cincinnati. And then, of course, they later became the Winter Guard. And so I got started with that and then marched with the 85 Star of Indiana and their opening year, and then went into the Garfield Cadets and was there. And I was with them, on and off up until 2023, where I was music coordinator and then program coordinator before that as well. So really that's kind of like that and Star of Indiana and Carolina Crown. Those are kind of that's my core of my drum corps experience. But I've been very blessed to be able to teach a lot of groups like Cavaliers, Phantom Regiment, Santa Clara Vanguard, Blue Knights, and a host of others, just a bunch of different corps over the years. This is one of the students at the Cavaliers asked me how many years you've been doing this, and I said, this is year 42.
I love that.
Yeah. The only thing that's changed is I'm not probably going to spend 2 weeks on a bus anymore.
If you don't mind me just asking a quick side note, like when people bring you in to consult or work with the group, what does that area usually focus on?
Macro, big picture kind of things. It can lead into micro. Like if someone's having some issues with their tone quality, a lot of times that can start with the enunciation of sound. and sometimes the tongue can be an enemy instead of a friend. And so sometimes the macro will lead to the micro and things of that nature. And there are different philosophies about, oh, do a bunch of different things at once, different concepts, and do it over and over and over, and they'll eventually get it. And then there's people that say, let's break this down and spend an hour on one concept. And I find, depending on the teacher, that both concepts can work.
Got it.
Uh, but it's mostly macro big picture things. Sometimes it's ensemble, sometimes it's brass pedagogy, sometimes it's show design and things of that nature. And if I'm a consultant, and if you're actually the person doing it, then like you're the show designer, then you're living it 24/7 kind of thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so still doing drum corps after all these years, and I love it. And then from a band standpoint, being a band director, like I said, I knew in seventh grade I was going to be a band director, and so I had a clear vision.
My
And
wife
I,
was the same. She was in seventh grade
yeah,
band and she knew she was going to be a band director.
exactly. And then, I had an uncle who told me you need to do as much as you can to get the experience you can in the time you can. It's not always about grades on your transcript, which is still an important aspect. So I made sure, like when I was in college, I still did drum corps. I did conducting symposiums, when they weren't even a thing back then, really. I went to travel to, the CBDNAs and the MENCs, and I tried to do all I could. And then I got an opportunity in 1992, pre-internet, pre-cell phone. We remember those days.
Hmm.
And word of mouth, and I said, and someone had said, "Hey, there's a job open at assistant band director job at Marian Catholic open." And I was like, no kidding. And I've been to BOA just to watch. I'd also been a swag, a volunteer for BOA in my collegiate years. So I was really trying to absorb all this stuff. And that was a very fine marching band, but what people may not also realize, a phenomenal concert program. Um, they were actually the featured performers at the 1989 Bands of America Summer Symposium as the symphony band, the symphonic band. So and it was just a heavy, awesome program. And it was kind of my style. And then so I saw Greg Bim. He was with the Cadets, and I was with Star of Indiana in '92. We were in Charleston, West Virginia, and I got this opportunity. I just bumped into him, and he said, "Yeah, there's a job open. You should apply." And so I did. And 2 months later, I was offered the job, and he gave me my start. And he's brilliant, one of the true masters of our craft. And he wrote the drill and the music, and then he taught me how to do a lot of that as well. Um, and that also went into percussion and things of that nature. So he gave me my start, and I was there for 9 years. And then I wanted to see what I could do on my own without a safety net. The job at Hebron opened up, and I applied and got that job. It was their second year of existence, I think, and they were a lot younger and smaller than the Hebron
Mm.
we know of today. But I was thrilled to be on the ground floor of that. And Andy Seeley's done a phenomenal job since then. But I had a really good time building that program. And then I left that one just because they were still a little hesitant to let the band travel out of state like I wanted to. And then I got an offer, a little headhunting recruiting from Plymouth Canton in Michigan, and they were wanting me to come up there for about 3 or 4 years. And then I don't know, the deal was right, and it worked out well, and we were able to get the band back in finals and do all that kind of stuff. And we did some. I mean, they were very much looking for competitive things. I'm more about the art. I'm more about the art involved. I don't really care about the competition as much because there's plenty of people who care about that more than I do.
Mm.
And then my youngest child got really, really ill with a disease, and after being there 5 years, and then the middle school job opened up, and so I was at Discovery Middle School. We did wonderful things there and for 12 years, and then I became an administrator, and I'm an administrator now for a very large virtual um, learning network for Michigan, where I have 1,800 high school students who are at risk. And so I'm their academic services coordinator. So I'm working to make sure they achieve their goals of graduation, but the arts are always with me.
Love that. So great. So today we're going to focus on some show design stuff, which, to be honest, I think is a huge topic, as we know. And when you're quote unquote stuck with a show and you see a group maybe near the beginning of the season, you're like, sometimes you can fix a lot of to help them clean, but when they start with a like a not great product, there's only so much you can do with it, right? So, this, as people are hearing it, are probably either, if they haven't heard it right away, they're either partway through their marching band season or they finished their marching band season. This is really something like big picture stuff. Like as people start designing in the future, these are things for them to keep in mind. So you have a blog about this that's going to be active as well. Are we sharing that with them in the show notes? Is that acceptable or no?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I'm starting a whole giant series, which I shared with you in advance, a ton of blogs that are going to be coming out over the next several months in the fall and into the spring as well.
Yep.
Maybe every 2 to 4 weeks, and just starting that process because there's so much out there and there's so much to offer. And I would love people to kind of check it all out. And I'm also, like a lot of us, I am a forever learner. So I'm excited to learn from all my peers around the country, whether they're my age or they're 22 and just getting started. I'm so eager to learn, and so if I share this information, it helps them, then that's great.
So people should have their pens and papers out. I mean, if they're driving in the car, maybe just have it off to the side and take a note later, come back or whatever. But really important to take some notes on this one, and I'm looking forward to learning as well. Again, click the show notes and people can actually see the full blog. But so the blog is called "How to Craft Emotional Impacts for Your Marching Band Show." Amazing, sort of like how to manipulate the audience, right? How to get the audience to feel what you want them to feel. I love this, and you have this broken down into 7 steps. Yeah. So what
Mhm.
was the genesis of starting all of this?
Well, this is only one component of what we would call a successful show, and I'm not putting competitive results in there. Someone I've seen great without obviously naming any names. I've seen some phenomenal performing ensembles with terrible shows, and that that can still carry you away if you're super good performers.
Mm,
Um, I've seen some fantastic shows in the hands of people who weren't ready for them yet from a skill standpoint. Like it's a great show, great idea, but they weren't at a level trained. So the idea was better than the performance abilities of the students at that time. So there's a lot of things where you have to kind of get all your ducks in a row and design. So there's a group I'm working with this year who last year had, I mean, they play well. They play super well. Um, but the visual, the drill, it was a little old school in the sense that there was not any modern visual techniques involved,
mhm.
and it wasn't written well and it wasn't executed well. So that was a real obstacle for them and that we're going to alleviate this year. So besides this emotional arc of the show, there has to be all the other aspects and components in place to help. And so when you look at the how to craft emotional impacts for your marching band show, it's there's two ways to look at this, maybe more. One is from the perspective of the director. Like I need to have a show that I can teach and I can come to every day, and we're going to work on this for 3 months or 2 months. And I'm talking mostly for not Friday night football band kind of shows. I'm talking more competitive shows
Mm.
on Saturdays. And so and maybe a little bit higher level of design. And so there's two ways to look at it. If I'm the director, I got to be motivated by it. It's got to be something that inspires me, but that's only one side of the coin. What if the kids are like, "Oh, I can't take this. Like I don't want to do this and we don't like this." And sometimes it's a great show for the wrong personality of the band. I mean, 1,000 years ago, I remember doing a concert band piece. I think it was they were super good. Like they were a really great program that we had that year. And I remember programming the Persiceti Symphony with it, and I loved it. I loved that piece. It's maybe my favorite band piece, and it wasn't right for them. They played it well, but it was just not very lively. They played all the right notes, right rhythms, and time, and tune, and tone. It just was boring. So I learned a valuable lesson that day. Years later, I programmed it again with another group, and they loved it. So it's one of those things. But then, do you do everything that the kids love? It's there's that whole battle as a director of what we choose. How much input do the kids have? So if I'm doing like if I'm doing a show that has a bunch of classical literature, we can make that work. And if the kids are into it, great. But if they're not, maybe they'd rather do something with this second movement's going to be um, Billie Eilish when the party's over. We're going to have like black tears come out of our eyes in the color guard. And, they can really get into that, but music, like any art, is subjective. You're never going to make everyone happy. It's
Mm.
just impossible. So the emotional arc has to be, when we talk about emotional impacts for your marching band show, it really, the best way to make it work is that both sides of that coin, the teacher, the band director, the staff, and the students feel motivated to spend time on this for 2 or 3 months to make it really great.
And when you say 2 or 3 months, that's really kind of underselling it a little bit, right? Because if you're designing, you're talking for a lot of us 10 months. You're like living with it and designing with it as it goes,
Right.
assuming you're in the design process.
Right.
Um,
If you're at band camp, that's when the kids learn it. They kind of start then. And then if they go all the way through like Bands of America Grand Nationals, or
yeah,
if they go to Florida State Championships or California, you're going deep into November.
yeah.
So yeah, you're right. It has to be something preferably that both groups really enjoy.
And as you're choosing that show, there are ways to choose classical music that maybe your kids wouldn't be into as much, but design it in a way around a concept they might know, or use a little bit of
Yes.
classical music, like you said. But really knowing your students is huge, so that you can craft a show that's uses the tools that you have in your band. For example, don't write a trumpet solo if you don't have a trumpet soloist, right?
Right. Right.
Write it at the level for your kids, and design it sort of where they're at. So that knowing your students, I think, is probably a bigger discussion, right? How do you actually tailor it for where they're at or where they're going to grow to? Um, but assuming we've done all that, right? Let's get into sort of the emotional part of this. So step one, you say, is creating your emotional theme,
Hmm.
right? So what do you mean by that?
So again, everything begins with that central emotional idea, asking yourself, what do I want the audience to feel at the end of this show? But that's also introspective. What do I want to feel as a performer? What do I want to feel as a freshman Barry sax player? That's a big deal too. Um, that what do I want the audience to feel and what do I want to feel? It could be joy, could be celebration, could be perseverance, could have a component of grief or nostalgia or redemption. But it's really important to choose something that's authentic to the director and the students because it really becomes your creative central point. Um, it influences the emotional aspect can really influence the musical choices, the choreography, the visual palette, and the pacing as well. So, for example, like a show about resilience, I've done about 2 or 3 of those kind of shows. Last time was 23 Cadets, a show about resilience after hardship could open in darkness and slowly progress toward like color, light, energy kind of thing. So I think that's one of the ways that you start creating your emotional theme. A lot of people will do very traditional design, like, okay, here's the music,
Hmm.
now here's the visual, and then we're gonna throw in this performance component, the performance energy, showmanship, or the as it says on sometimes a lot of judges sheets, or in this case, the emotional uh, idea, concept, and the performance of that emotion. I think a lot of times that traditional formula, while it can still work, there are variations on that, as there should be. A lot of times we'll write like a visual mode. We want this to happen visually, and then we will create original music to fit that visual concept or idea. And also, I think the same thing is involved with emotional impacts. A lot of people don't invest into that idea as much as I think they should, because I think it really gives a lot of joy and satisfaction to the performers and hopefully the staff as well.
Yeah, that's something I think for traditional band directors, right? We go to school to be a band director and all this, and we might have marching band experience, but maybe we haven't like been designing shows. Well, then all of a sudden you're in charge of designing shows. And I remember the days like, here's the pieces we're gonna do, let's write the drill and let's go from there. You're right. And it can work, but this whole like thinking about the show concept and ideas first is a whole hurdle that I think it takes directors a while to do. And for somebody who's been through this, has like, I really struggled with it at that, and now that's the way we do it. People need to reach out to mentors, and like, if you don't know how to do that yet, just have a team around you of people that are your people that you can throw ideas off of, that you can take ideas and criticism from, so that year after year, you're improving in that sort of, way to design, which is not natural for a lot of us who've gone through the band world.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
I mean, we look back in hindsight, the things they don't teach you in music school, right? And you just learn. But yes, I agree with you 100%.
So when next, when you talk about selecting music with emotional depth, that doesn't
Mhm.
always mean sad music, right? But it just has to be quality.
It does, and I know that's very broad, and but again, it's subjective, just like music, art is to the eye and ear of the beholder. So, and it's also selecting music with emotional depth. That's going to have a different meaning, maybe for me, who pushing 60 and doing this a long time, versus someone who's 24 and hungry to make a stamp on the marching world, versus a sophomore clarinet player. That's going to be totally different. And a lot of times the students, they accept their role, and but they also look at it as concrete. For example, I'm the student, I learn. You're the teacher, you teach. And we know as educators, that's not a one-way street. It's totally two-way. They teach us a lot about our craft and the educational process of teaching versus learning. So I think that finding music that is the emotional backbone. I think the repertoire that naturally expresses the theme of that emotional depth, and that could be anything. So, for example, a director will say, "Well, I want a show that's fun." that's just that's like that's broad, and so we have to go a little bit deeper, and we have to I do a series of question and answers with the directors to see kind of what we're looking at. And sometimes they've talked to the students, sometimes they haven't. Sometimes a student is right there, like a leader will be there, kind of like part of the process with the teacher, which I love that. I think that's great, because when you have voice, you have ownership, and I think and there's more of an investment. um, but it could be like, okay, we're gonna play. I need something that's very well known, but I need it to be fun, and I don't want to pay copyright fees for it. So, all right, well, let's take Johann Sebastian Bach and let's make it into a rumba. That's pretty fun. And that could be really fun. In fact, we're doing that with one of our shows this year. So and so there's depth, there's musical depth. There could also be emotional depth, and that depth doesn't have to be like I was referring to, like a dark Billie Eilish kind of approach. I mean, you can have depth with a Bach rumba piece, and how it starts with percussion, and you lead one voice at a time, and all of a sudden you got this street parade happening, and the kids are then they're kind of really playing it with kind of an Afro Cubano kind of feel to the melody, maybe a little salsa, and it's just all of a sudden and you throw some reds and oranges and yellows out there, you have something that those students and hopefully your community will remember for a lifetime. So I think it's also important that when you're selecting music with emotional depth, that you're thinking about contrast. You're building an arc that has varied tempo, tonality, and instrumentation throughout the show. I think that's one way how you can be memorable. Um, I remember one year there was this, I don't remember the original source material, but I remember Greg Bim did this at Marian Catholic years ago, um, 2010, 11, somewhere around there. But he had this small ensemble in their lyrical production, and it was like an oboe, bassoon, but there was also like a hand dulcimer. Then there was like a big marimbula that they were playing, like a giant thumb piano, and like a hand drum. I mean, that it was beautifully played. It was a brilliant set of instrument colors, and you remember that. And so I think those type of varied instrumentation can really be helpful. I think you shouldn't be afraid to arrange pieces that suit your band's strengths as well, whether it's pop, classical, cinematic scores, or original commissions. And sometimes if you're running on a tight budget, you can tap into lesser known works or up and coming composers. I do this with drill writers as well. Sometimes if you're on a really tight budget, there are always young visual designers who want to make a name for themselves, and they have a chip on their shoulders to prove themselves, as long as that doesn't manifest into demands that are beyond the student's abilities. I think that that could be a winning combination. And also public domain works. That really works for that step number two, selecting music with emotional depth.
Just a couple thoughts I had as you're doing that. As band directors, we sort of tie our value into how good our group is, right? That's like a thing that we all struggle with. And
Sometimes we do.
you see some of these drum corps or the top BOA bands, and they have these technical passages that are just out of this world, right? Well, I think people need to like put the brakes on those. If unless you have one of those sections, I think finding the beauty in simplicity, so the students can master the music as on the movement, right, on the move, and with movement, that the music is only part of their show. So simple can be good, soft can be good, woodwinds are good, but they don't have to be going a million miles an hour. Finding, like, you mentioned colors earlier, finding the colors. Maybe you've got four bassoon players in your band, but they don't march bassoon. Well, there's your small ensemble moment, or maybe you've got 10 flugelhorns, and that's an easy thing, like just here's a flugelhorn feature, right? So just that, like, as you get older and do this more and more, it's less about let's put 10,000 notes in this program and let's just make it something that is going to be worthwhile. So thinking more simple, especially for younger directors, is kind of a good way to go. It kind of goes against our ego of trying to get a lot of notes out there in the field.
I agree with everything you just said. I think that's wonderful advice for younger directors. But you said something that really resonated with me about putting it on the move. As Matt Harloff, who's the band director at Avon and is the brass caption head at Carolina Crown, one of his phrases, he says, "It doesn't count if it's not on the move." And it's very true. It doesn't. It doesn't count if it's not on the move. And so, or in a performance field situation. And then one of my phrases I tell students when I teach them and now guest conduct, the hardest rhythm you'll ever play is a whole note. The only thing harder than that is a tied whole note or a fermata, because keeping that pitch perfect, not just the pitch, but the tone, and keeping it beautiful, and then expressing it with crescendi, decrescendi, or things like that without altering tone, without altering pitch. That's harder because it's also more exposed. Like moms and dads and grandpas, they can hear when that's not right. They just don't always know what it is. But if you're playing like, very technical passage and things like that, sometimes you can get away with a lot. Maybe not with a judge, but definitely with the community. And I think that sometimes that simplicity, which works in some ways of a great, a more approachable skill set, has its own difficulties that are inherent as well.
Yeah.
Simple is sometimes harder in some ways, but always worth the study, always worth the effort.
And I know there are sometimes too, where when we start talking about integrating choreography and visuals as part of step three, if you have a moment where the design is going to be very demanding drill wise, that should be part of the musical design as well. Like, don't put all the demand in one spot.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, varying that up a little bit, things of that nature, and sometimes even spreading the demand out. Like one piece we're doing this year with one group, the melody, there's a lot of 16 count phrases, as you'll find in marching band, and but 8 counts is with this group, the next time it's this group, next time it's over here with this group, and your eyes and ears are going all over the field when those groups take it up. There's an ensemble challenge to that, but it's and a little bit of a visual opportunity as well. But again, that kind of variety, um and the melody that they're doing there, it's not really hard at all, but because of the way they're being asked to do it, can add a depth or demand to it, um that is a little bit more maybe technical than emotional. um
So I think when we're talking about adding choreography and visuals, if you're
Yes.
doing this after the moment, you've already made, you're writing the drill or all these other things that go with it. Do you just basically have this North Star of, okay, this is the mood we're going for right now, so let's make sure that all of our content that we're adding visually fits that? Or do you ever, as a director, sometimes if you look at it, you're like, that's great choreography, but it doesn't fit this moment? Like how do you square all that?
Well, and I think that depends on. I think it's important that the band director kind of has conversations. So you want to be always responsive rather than reactive. So you don't want to get stuff out there and then, okay, what's the color guard going to do here? Sometimes that's okay, but a lot of times it's not, especially if you're involving audiovisual coordination and you're also coordinating within the visual caption. You're coordinating um, props and guard movement and equipment and things like that. Some of that needs to be thought out in advance.
Mhm.
So from the integrating choreography and visual standpoint, which is step three, um, the visuals are the emotional amplifiers of what you're doing from an emotional and musical standpoint. So the the visual gives the audience cues to feel what the music is saying. I think that's a really important point. And I think it's important to think beyond drill, explore guard movement, explore uh, choreo in the winds and percussion based on what they have in their hands or don't have in their hands. Staging is always important. How are we interacting with the props while we're playing or while we're moving or while we are emoting, and even the uniforms, how they're designed. A lot of people, we use the traditional uniforms that we use every Friday night and have for 20 years, and that's fine. And other people change uniforms every year based on the show. But I think thinking beyond the drill is really important. Using visual contrast. So, for example, if there's something that's harmonious in terms of our emotional spirit or sorrow or nostalgia, that can have kind of a flowing motion to it. While if you're dealing with emotional aspects of victory, triumph, or anger or things like that, there's a lot of sharp accents involved with that. Then the drill or the visual or the body choreo is going to look way, way, way different. And I think it's important. And sometimes, even as a judge, I've judged a long time, and sometimes we do want it kind of spelled out for us. Sometimes we do like those literal connections. There's other times where you can take some time where you can develop something, and it makes us really kind of ponder a little bit. There's other times you just want it served. What are you trying to tell us? What do you want us to feel? What do you want us to perceive here? And can you please put that on a silver platter? I think that's okay. And you don't need to have giant, expensive props or set design. Simple but intentional choices can make a big difference. Like if you have a single slow moving flag in a ballad where that's an individual focus based on what's going on here, like maybe it's you're doing Les Mis and we're at the end of the battle, so to speak, and we're now we're going into a totally different mood. That single flag, ripped and torn and things like that can have a very emotional impact as well for the audience.
So a couple things I'm thinking about as you're going through that is one, the need for a storyboard or a timeline as you're building a show. So people haven't done that, at a very basic level, like make an Excel spreadsheet and then have like, here's production one, production two, production three. And then in each column, put here's what the winds are doing, here's what the battery's doing, here's what the guard's doing, front ensemble, if that counts. So like you're planning all of that as you go through so your drill writer can see, oh, this is what's happening. So that big picture, I remember doing it like hand by hand on a blank piece of paper. And now, everybody, I'm sure there's lots of different ways to do it, but that's how we do that. And when it comes to the visual stuff, especially in the horn line, like staying current's important. Like seeing what's going on out there in the marching world, because you see these bands that like you can tell their directors haven't seen anything in the last 20 years, or they just like, this is how we do it. And right now the art is really, first of all, it's like a third guard, a third percussion, and a third winds, right? It's no longer, like predominantly winds and then some percussion and then a little bit of guard. But at the same time, it's as much musical theater as it is anything else. So
Yes.
in the show design, finding ways to comfortably design for your students, like maybe just stretching them a little bit so that they're staying current in the design. Well, at the same time, it's hard because we don't want to just copy drum corps, right? Because like that's drum corps and you're a high school marching band, and there's lots of different things with that. But that idea of staying current and building your show through a storyboard, I think, are important aspects of that.
Agreed. And we use that in our approach. We also, in terms of building the show and also understanding the skills of designer. I know this is a little bit not on the emotional arc, but I think it's important. Like I have, and I think I shared this with you, so you may have seen, I have a music overview sheet and a visual overview sheet where we're going through all their skill sets and we're giving them grades. The director is giving them grades. So we know, okay, oh, I want a jazz run the flutes here. Oh, they got a C in marching, so
Mhm.
like they saw last year. So we're not going to do that. But boy, the saxophones can do that. Let's use them in that moment.
Yeah.
So it's important to be really organized with your preparation, so you can make not only the performance skills of the students their greatest, but also allow them to be more emotional in displaying those
Yeah,
performance skills.
it's knowing the tools that you have in your bag, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and as we finish that up, like I remember a long time ago talking with a drill writer who was writing our closer, and I remember the drill writer on the phone says, "What's the equipment of the guard here? Like, what is the guard using for equipment?" And I had no answer. I was like, I hadn't thought about it one bit, right? And it's like, well, these are things that we would have now in my program we would think about, 6 months earlier, but that whole idea of planning forward, if people aren't doing that yet, like don't feel bad. It just takes time to kind of step through these things as you go. Step number 4 is employing digital soundscapes, which I know some people are for. I love it. Some people are against, and I know there's a way to do too much, right? It's really easy to turn up that synthesizer and add other things that hides issues. And I'm not sure how much of that we're talking about versus the soundscape side.
Well, I do think employing digital soundscapes can be impactful. So, but you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that at all. But if you choose to use a digital layer, it can bring new emotional dimensions to your show. The ambiance, transitions, narrative voiceovers, subtle effects. I think those are all great techniques. However, I think as it's important to note, you should not overdo it because it should serve the theme of the show, not distract from it. That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think they're doing smoke and mirrors when they're using digital landscapes, but what they're really doing is making something obvious as something that's covering up, or it is the time involved is way too much. So the balance you have of acoustic sounds being made versus electronic sounds being made, not by human. I think that's important. Some of the accessible tools today can make it even possible for budget conscious programs. Like it's very friendly in many regards. So like Soundtrap, Logic, especially Main Stage, I think those are really good opportunities, especially if we're on a budget. And I think the digital soundscapes can be really important for, say, environmental type of storytelling. So you can use rain sounds, wind, heartbeat. I used one of those last year, and it was really helpful. Or even spoken word. I do think I think it's important though that, and again, this is a little bit more objective than subjective emotional, but I do think it's important that you have a good coordination within your music and audio elements, because sometimes people have too many things going on and they don't realize, but in the score it's just it can be it can look thin, but there can be a lot going on there from the aural standpoint. And then you're putting percussion with that, and then you're putting like a narration within that, and it's all happening at once, and the staging's not great. So it's like, what do you want me to focus on here? What's going on here? So I think it's really important that we don't overdo it. That digital soundscape should serve the theme and not distract from it, and making sure that at any point you can tell exactly. If I shut my eyes, I can tell exactly what I'm supposed to be listening to. Like it's so, oh, it says forte on the score. Everything's vertical. It says forte for everybody. That's never the truth. unless it's like a, a stand and play block chord or something, and even that's not even, you're always going to want a little bit more low
Mm.
than you do high sometimes. But I think it's important that it's obvious. And so I have a deaf child, and so if we go to theater, they know exactly what they're supposed to be focusing on because of the lighting on the stage, and where the focus is based on the lighting. So how do we do that? Well, we actually literally have a soundboard to help with that. But if we had no electronic whatsoever, and everything was acoustic and not mic'd and not amped, still the same thing. What is it you want me to hear? And what is it you want me to see? If I do this, like my child who can't hear, do they know what I'm supposed to be looking at? What's the focus from a visual standpoint? And does the music work with that and vice versa? I think that's pretty important. And not that you always has to be one main, you can have multiple stages with a primary, secondary, and tertiary focus. That's fine, especially with guard. But I think it's really important that we use digital soundscapes to enhance, um, and to serve the theme and not distract from it.
I will say, and I know some people are in the position where they have to do this, but the person running the soundscape stuff or the audio in an ideal world should not be the band director, because the band director, as like I won't even sit in the audience. This is a me. Like a lot of us are like that. You're standing on the sideline, not at there, but like at the bleachers. Like, what if somebody falls? What if there's an emergency? Like, I feel like I'm the last stop as my band. Like, so that's the way I've always done that. So if you're doing the soundscape and you're like thinking about that, it's hard to tailor all the other things. It's like a head coach calling plays in the NFL. It's a similar thing. It's like, do they have time to think about both things? That's sort of my thing, and you might be in a place where that's the only thing you can do, and maybe you do that for now, but ideally having one of your staff members do that is really important. I also wanted to mention, you were talking about voiceovers, in our this past year show. So 2 years ago, almost now, we had one of our band directors and the drill writer was this legendary teacher, and was helping us for a number of years. So students were very connected with him. He passed away tragically in a car accident. It was one of these like gone sighted sort of things. It was terrible. So we did a show called Legacy last year that was basically like, to him. And the whole show was designed around him. But what I wanted to mention was the audio voiceovers. We decided to 4 points in the show to take quotes that we know he said all the time. So then what
Mm.
we did is we took audio from YouTube of his voice, and with an AI generator, we then had the ability to him posthumously read these for us. We sent that to his family so he could hear it, and they thought that was the greatest thing ever. So like the emotional impact was huge, to have these moments and then to hear this person that this is an homage to literally reading this custom tailored thing that the students wrote.
Yeah.
There's just some different things you can do with AI now too, which is cool.
True. You're right. I'm not what you would call a traditionalist or a purist or anything like that. I like new, I like change, I like avant-garde. I like I like but I will say with voiceovers, I would encourage all the teachers out there and the directors. I mean, I can go to 10 websites and do a voiceover on AI and have it ready in 5 minutes, that kind of thing with the text. But I would encourage you to go the human route. Uh, you know, employ someone. Yes, it might be a little more expensive and things like that, but using Fiverr or voices.com or things like that, I think you can find some people, and I think it serves a great purpose and can maybe even more custom to the emotional aspect of your show as well. So I encourage you all to use the real people and not necessarily the AI when it comes to voiceovers, if it's anything extended. Like if you're doing a show about the poetry of E. E. Cummings, or something, then maybe you should look at that, or Robert Frost. Let's look at a human rather than um, Andy from 11 Labs or whatever.
Yeah, for our situation, it was definitely a different sort of situation. But your comment's a good balance to that as well.
I
Um,
can't imagine the emotion that your community and the kids have doing a show like that. That's powerful.
yeah, and even hearing that voice over the first time, like the whole staff cried. We're like, oh my gosh, it's just it was very impactful.
Yes, for
Um, until the point where we got to the ballad and we decided because he loved the clarinet, the entire band was going to play clarinet, and then it got real fast. That was awesome.
Yeah, how
But
about those throat tones, brass players?
it was great. That's a whole other episode. All right,
Right.
step five, fostering emotional connection in the performance.
Right. So I think the design can only go so far. The students need to believe in the emotional message. And that goes back to my earlier points about, do the students have buy-in? Do they have voice to establish buy-in? It's not a voting situation. It's nothing like that, but should there be some, maybe a couple or so student leaders that are involved in the process? Because it's important that the students believe in the emotional message, whatever works for your community as a band director. um, you can hold these kind of guided conversations about the theme and ask, what does this show mean to you, or how do you personally relate to this moment? I'm a big fan of imagery big time, and what I try to do is connect the things that the students know that I can as well. Like, sometimes it's movies, sometimes it's TV shows, sometimes it's video games. If you can use something that that individuals know, or massive, maybe it's something big like Star Wars, or maybe it's something, like a video game like Minecraft or something. Maybe there's something that you can use in their terminology to connect what you want them to do in that moment. Maybe it's something joyous, maybe it's something angry, maybe it's something sad, maybe it's something beautiful. But I think it's important to connect with their life experience, which, is anywhere between 14 and 18,
Mm.
right? Something like that. And and I remember at that age, I thought I knew it all, and you realize now you don't have a lot of life experience under your belt. So I think it's important that you relate the emotional connection in the performance. You have to help get them there. You have to connect the dots sometimes for them, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes we're doing this big dissonant build, and then it ends in resonance at a fortissimo chord, and it's real exciting, and moms and dads do this in the audience, and that's an easy one, and you can feel some goosebumps with that. Sometimes it's not quite that easy, and you have to connect the dots as a teacher. um, Using role playing, acting exercises, maybe bring in the theater coach from the school to help. I think that's really important. I remember back in the day, we were doing some stuff in Star of Indiana, especially 1993, and we were really exploring some uncharted territory. And we had George Penny, who was the theater professor for Indiana University, who really, really helped us out. And that show is very memorable today, but I don't think it would have been without his help, and of course the other designers. So I think, and there was so much that we had to get the students to kind of buy into, the members and things like that. So I think sometimes, whether they're the teachers do, the band directors doing it, or other staff, or maybe like, again, theater coach or theater teacher from the building, what are some ways that we can bring out some emotional aspects from their life experience to put into the music itself, and empower the students to own the show emotionally, not just write notes, write rhythms in step and in time and in tune and in touch. You know, can we own the show emotionally? That's what connects with the audience when it's all said and done.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of practical ways that you can get students to do that. One of the things that we use is, if as you're performing, when you're at that point where they're comfortable enough with what they're doing, now it's about, okay, how do I project? How do I perform this to an audience? Pick a judge or pick an audience member, and your job is to make them feel something, right? Because
Yeah.
like even the next step, if you feel it on the field, that's amazing. But how do you get somebody who doesn't know the show, doesn't know you, how do you get them to buy into that show?
Right. And if I'm a member on the field and I've been charged by my band director or band directors to, like you just said, find someone and make them react, kind of thing, don't focus on your parents. That's too easy.
Mhm.
I mean, you can do anything and they're going to be like, yeah, and take pictures and stuff. Find someone you don't know and see if you can make them react. It's almost like the members on the field, the musicians, and the visual expression and the emotion. They are the puppet master, so to
Yeah.
speak, and they are making the audience feel a certain way. And if I always tell my students, if you want the audience to feel goosebumps, you have to feel them first.
And it's hard to look at that person too much because you're supposed to be watching the drum major, and then
That's right.
you're dressing
That's
the
right.
form and doing all the things. So don't
Yeah,
stare at the person. That's
that's
dangerous, but
exactly right.
find some ways to connect with them. Um, so when we're doing all this show design stuff and we're trying to make this really emotional, take them on a journey through the show thread, what are some ways to tailor what we're doing here if we have a very tight budget?
So, and that's going to be very adaptive to each individual program based on what they have and what they don't have, what they need and what they don't have. So, my personal philosophy is emotion isn't about price tags, it's about smart design. And I think that if you have a group of designers that are pretty good at what they do, or really good at what they do, if you said we're going to do a show about an apple, then we should be able to pull that off. We should be able to somehow pull that off. I remember, well, I'll get into that in a minute, but leverage what you do have. You have talented players, you have creative kids, you have a helpful staff, you have wonderful parent volunteers. Um, and so utilize what you do have. You can reuse old props, maybe with some fresh paint on it. Use the school theater art departments for costumes and staging. An example of that is Dartmouth High School in Massachusetts,
Mm.
the percussion program with Tom Ungst. Again, Hall of Famer, wonderful what he does. I love working with him. Um, and the artistic director for the program has been Darcy, who is really creative things like that. But they have utilized the school's art department, and I'm not sure how it works from a logistical standpoint or a financial standpoint, but basically the art department makes all their props and sets, and it's amazing what they do. And I know it's way less than would it be if you would have to have that done more professionally or something like that. And it may be better than sometimes the artistic, not the engineering components, but the artistic components of volunteer parents. So I think that can really work out as well. And collaborate with other programs or local colleges for support on that. Sometimes it's also we go for you can look online. There's so many like Facebook groups with like props and floors and things like that you can look at. Sometimes the same thing happens when um, in college programs of theater or other high schools, they're getting rid of old stuff, and it might be something that could be beneficial to you.
Mhm.
So I think sometimes you have to dig a little bit. You have to do a little detective work, so to speak. But having a wonderful emotional performance should not be about the price tag.
Another part of that too, you mentioned you have a staff, and then like I've been very lucky to have a staff my whole career, but there's people who are a one person show, right? And so if you're looking to have a staff but you don't have the money yet, here's my recommendation. Look for volunteers who are in the area, even if they have limited, look for the traits of somebody you want to have on your staff. Find one person, maybe they're ex-band students who are now 25 years old or
Right.
whatever. Try to find some people and just be honest. Look, we want some help. We're looking for somebody to help with this program. We have no money. Like we can't pay a staff right now. Are you willing to, and then sometimes if you get a couple people on staff and they do it a couple of years, you can then go to the school and say, look, we have this body of people who've been doing this work. It really should cost this. At some point, can we put in $10,000 so we can start paying people? There's a way to like slowly grow a staff as well.
Right. And there's sometimes in even looking inside the student body of your school. Like for example, I remember there was one program I worked with. They lost their choreographer for whatever reason, and they were isolated, like geographically, they're pretty isolated. So they had a phenomenal dance team at this school,
Mm.
and it wasn't the same kind of choreo that the band uses, but basically what happened was they a lot of the people on this dance team were also members of National Honor Society. So they did the choreography for the band and got all their volunteer hours in. And they learned they watched some BOA stuff to see what was modern, and for them that was really easy compared to what they were being asked to do on a day. So it was a real win-win situation
Mm.
for them.
Got to know your school and what you have for ability there.
Yeah.
Last step you have here, you talk about reviewing and refining, and sometimes you get like, how do you know? This is sort of an off the cuff question. How do you know when you get a judge's comment and you're like, that's a great comment? I don't know if we can actually fix that in this show. It's part of the design, or and how much of it is something you can fix. Now it depends on what that is, right?
Right. I think it's also important that in the reviewing and refining process of step 7, that you also have perspective. Like, for example, watch how the emotion and the performance grows over seasons. So go back and watch early run throughs of the season like a fresh audience member.
Mm.
Sometimes that keeps it in perspective of where you're at. Sometimes, again, I don't think there's a thing wrong with competition at all. I enjoy it, but I don't let it dominate me or my mindset. And so it's one of those things where the ultimate responsibility as teachers is to the student. What's best for students? And are we excelling them? Are they growing under our leadership and tutelage? And so I think sometimes when you look at those comparisons, it's like looking at someone's picture from the beginning of a school year to the end. You always see a difference. Same thing with your marching season. And with part of the reviewing and refining process also, you can ask yourself, is this moment clear? Is the emotion being communicated in this moment? Especially if something's been called for lacking clarity on a judge's comment. Is it objective or is it subjective? Is it technical or is it um, emotional based from the performance standpoint, or is it a connectivity? It's always important to get outside feedback from trusted colleagues, mentors, even students. Like a lot of times we would go, we would have a moment and I'd bring like a few seniors up or something like that and let them watch the run through. And so they could see what we were talking about. And sometimes we would say things in our teacher lingo. And I remember one time a bunch of students were saying, "Hey, that moment, here's what he's trying to say." So they kind of like translated into kids speak. And all of a sudden it was better because they just used much better slang than I did.
and
So
and the kids listen differently.
they do. They totally do. Um, I also think part of the reviewing and refining process is encouraging student reflection. So, what felt right, what didn't land right, things like that. And sometimes that's through self perspective. We do that right after they come off the field. Like, okay, let's talk through it. Let's talk through the show with your section or your smaller group or your subs, and then let's talk about it right when they get off the field, so it's fresh. Um, and also video review that really helps quite a bit, and not being afraid and being open to cutting or reworking if something doesn't serve the performance aspects or the emotional arc. I think that's really important, but again,
Mhm.
that's all based on timing too. If you make any changes or edits, they have to have time to get that under their belt, so to speak.
Couple thoughts I have on the video side of things. I have a parent who came to me a few years ago and says, I have a drone. Would you like a drone video of the show? I was like, yes. So now we have that. It's like it's the ultimate you can't hide because it's directly from above. And it's been a great teaching tool. You can kind of stop and be like, you can't see it from the front, but from the very top, you can see it like it's extreme angle. Um, Another thought I had is I learned a while ago from one of my mentors about not giving the kids all of the choreography when they learn the drill, like
Mhm.
pacing that out. And he'd say, yep, we're doing something else here, but it's going to be 3 weeks before championships, because his purpose was, I want to keep things fresh. I want the show to continue to evolve for people who see it multiple times.
That's
I
right.
also, I also want the students to feel like they're not just cleaning all the time. They're also adding some dimension to it as the season goes along.
And every director has to do what they feel works best for themselves and their program. But I tend to subscribe to that idea of adding things throughout the season to show growth, to show evolution, and things of that nature. And other people are saying, no, let's get it out there at once, let it be dirty, and we'll clean it up along the way. Whatever works best for that teacher and that program and those students is fine, as long as the end product is what you want it to be.
That's awesome. Mark, thanks so much for getting together and presenting on this. I appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.